This week, we continue with the story of why the church changed its worship practice from Passover, as God intended us to do, to Easter, the celebration of the goddess Ostra. And last week, I finished with the words that sin enslaves us, but God's ways set us free. So now I begin this week's short podcast to help you understand a bit more about the circumstances of that change. Now I've established the importance of the Jewish people in God's master plan for freedom. I want to highlight how God used the Hebrews to teach us about how we can reach that freedom. This part of the story of Passover begins with their lives, the lives of the Hebrews in Egypt, beginning around 1500 BC. The Hebrews, as they were then known, lived in the land of Egypt, which was ruled by the pharaohs. The Hebrews grew in number and became partly assimilated into the ways and the customs of the Egyptians, who were pagan in their spirituality. They had many gods and goddesses, including the goddess of women and fertility. Her name was Hathor. She is also known as Isis and became known by the Greeks as Aphrodite, later to be known as Ostra by the Romans. This is where we get the name ostrigen or estrogen. At the time when the Hebrews were living in Egypt, the Canaanites, who were then living in Canaan, also worshipped the gods of the Egyptians. As the population of the Hebrews grew in Egypt, the pharaohs, in fear of their expansion, began to oppress them and cause their slavery to become extremely painful and cruel. God used Moses and his brother Aaron to enter into a dialogue with Pharaoh, during which God sent 10 plagues to the Egyptians. Before the final plague, which was to be the death of the firstborn of all Egyptians and their livestock, God instructed Moses to speak to the Hebrews about what they must do at a particular time on a particular day on what would be the first month of the Hebrews' calendar, and which was to be the first Passover ever to be held by the Hebrews. The timing was perfectly in line with the cycles of the moon as God intended it to be, and this timing would now become instituted in the calendar, the biblical calendar, which is still followed today by Jews to show them and us when God's appointed feasts would be celebrated. The instructions given to the Hebrews was to take a lamb without any blemish, meaning a perfect lamb, and keep it until the 14th day of the first month. Then they should slaughter it at twilight on the 14th day, twilight meaning sunset, this being the start of a new day. In the West, we use the Gregorian calendar following the cycles of the sun and instituted by the Catholic Church in the 16th century. And this calendar has the day beginning at midnight. You will remember that I mentioned earlier how Nimrod created a sun calendar. Well, that was interwoven into the church's calendar of worship. This is important when I make the point about Easter and Passover later. The calendar of the Hebrews given by God was to follow the timings of the moon, and Passover is calculated by the Hebrew calendar. So back to the Hebrews in Egypt. They were instructed to take some of the blood from the slaughtered lamb and paint it over the doorposts and lintels of their homes with the herb hyssop, and to eat the lamb. Then we read in the book of Exodus chapter 12 the following further instructions: that they shall eat the lamb that same night. They should eat it roasted over fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Unleavened bread meaning bread without yeast, which would not need any time to take to rise before baking. The lamb should not be eaten raw or boiled in water, but roasted over a fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. They should not let any of it remain until morning, and anything that remains until morning they should burn. They were to eat it with their loins girded, sandals on their feet, and staff in hand, basically ready to run, and they should eat it hurriedly. God then emphasized through Moses that this is the Passover of the Lord. God then told them that he would pass through the land of Egypt that night and would strike down every firstborn of the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. He said that on all the gods of Egypt he would execute judgments, meaning the fertility goddess as well as all the other gods. And that's an important point I will make later in my story. Then God said through Moses that the blood would be a sign for them, meaning the Hebrews, on the houses where they lived, when he saw the blood over the doorways. He would then pass over them, and they would live through the plague of death, which he would execute over all who did not have the sign of the blood of the Lamb over them. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the story, and next week we'll carry on with how God instructed the Hebrews to move on with the celebration of Passover. So Shabbat Shalom to everybody. God bless. Mike Fryer, Wales.